continue to happen. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. For the benefit of those on the video, there are about 200 people here. See how much they laugh? Because I'm underestimating. They're really 300. Okay. Please silence your cell phones before we begin. Also, before we begin, I'd just like to mention and give a thanks to Linda and Marvin Diamond for sponsoring the lecture this evening in memory of Marvin's parents, Paul and Sonia Diamond, who I believe share a yahrzeit, several years apart though. Right? Okay. May their neshamas have respective aliyahs in memory, as a tribute to our learning this evening. Okay, tonight I decided to do things a little differently in terms of the handout which I gave you. Those of us who need refresher courses in doing some of the mitzvos which we're familiar with doing. But tonight I wanted to look at, in our Hilchos 101 class, the differences between the mitzvos and halachos that are specific to men and specific to women. Every time we have this class, I'm trying to get something which is good for everybody. So hopefully, since we're a community that has many men and many women, I figured that would be a good choice for the evening. The outline speaks for itself, but what I would like to do is go through the principles behind the different categories. Some of these are just straight psukim in the Torah, which I didn't reference, but if anybody who wants more comprehensive sources needs help in finding these things, I'll be happy to do that with you afterwards or later. So on the teaser flyer, all of these questions which you see on the first side of the page were asked. And without going into explanations, the page gives you the answers. So in the first half of the class this evening, I'm going to explain anything which is not self-explanatory. And in the second half, I'll be giving the visual demonstrations. It might not be 50-50, it might end up being, like Yogi Berra's 50-50, 90% one and 10% the other, but okay, anyway. Okay, so first and foremost, what are the mitzvos that are only for men? So the main sources that address these categories, even though the Gemara, of course, addresses these as well, are in the Rambam, which I gave you here. Rambam Hilchos Avodah Zarah, chapter 12, and the Rambam gives summaries in his Sefer HaMitzvos, the Book of Commandments, at the end of them, and he describes which mitzvos are for everybody, which is most mitzvos, and specifically which ones are for men or women. In the fourth bullet point in this section, you see the Rambam Sefer Mitzvos. He actually gives the numbers of which mitzvos are specifically for men, and I enumerated what they are there, where he says that men are obligated in saying Shema at the proper time, in the study of Torah, head tefillin, arm tefillin, which the Rambam enumerates as two separate mitzvos. Not everybody who enumerates mitzvos counts tefillin of the head and of the arm as two separate mitzvos, but some count them as just one mitzvah of tefillin. The mitzvah of tzitzis, the mitzvah of owning a Torah, birchas kohanim, because that's only done by male kohanim, so that's a mitzvah for men, even though everybody is a beneficiary of it. Sitting in the sukkah, taking a lulav, hearing the shofar, having children, the chassan obligations for a year, and bris milah. We're going to get into the having children one in a few minutes. Okay, now, that's the Rambam's list in the Sefer HaMitzvos summary. You'll notice that a lot of these things have one category in common, and they are what we call time-bound mitzvos. That's what we call in Hebrew mitzvos hasei shazman garama. The Gemara in Brachos, Daf Chaf Amud Aleph 20a, mentions specifically that men are obligated in time-bound mitzvos. A couple of years ago, I gave a Shabbos HaGadol drasha about time-bound mitzvos. It was related to Pesach because one of the time-bound mitzvos is eating matzah on the one hand, which women are obligated in. That's a Torah obligation, eating matzah on Pesach. And there's also the mitzvah of having 4 cups of wine, which is a rabbinic obligation, which women are obligated in as well. So I spoke about it at the time. My father actually mentioned those on Shabbos as well, because Hanukkah is another time-bound mitzvah, rabbinic mitzvah, lighting the Shabbos candles, which women are obligated in. The three rabbinic mitzvahs that are time-bound, which women are obligated in, appear several times in the Talmud, and in each case the Talmud tells us that the reason why women are obligated in lighting Hanukkah candles, the 4 cups of wine, and in hearing Megillas Esther, are because women were involved in the miracle. And there are 2 ways to understand what that means. On the one hand, women were saved as well. Everybody was saved, so we're all part of the miracle. And on the other hand, women were those who brought about the miracle. Esther in the Purim story, Yehudis, and perhaps Hannah in the Hanukkah story, and the Nashim Tzidkanios, the righteous women who brought about the redemption from Egypt. So the women have these specific obligations. But otherwise, women are generally speaking exempt from time-bound mitzvahs unless the Torah says otherwise. And the exceptions to that are enumerated in the parentheses. Women are obligated in Shabbos, which is a time-bound mitzvah, and Shabbos comes about because time brings it about, but nonetheless women are obligated in it. The eating of matzah on Pesach, as I mentioned. Korban Pesach, which is a time-bound mitzvah, but it's only obligatory. The truth is, we could probably bring the Korban Pesach now if we'd be allowed to do anything more than just walk on the Temple Mount. But that's a much longer discussion, which I'm not going to get into now. But Korban Pesach, it just has to be sacrificed on the Temple Mount. But women are obligated in that. And of course, the mitzvah of Hakel and the mitzvah of being joyous on Yom Tov. Hakel is a once in 7 years obligation for the Jewish people to all come to Jerusalem. And the Torah says that it applies to everybody, men, women, children. The Torah enumerates those things specifically. But otherwise, time-bound mitzvahs women are exempt from, and men are specifically obligated in. And there are many reasons given for it. Simply put, I guess the 2 most popular reasons are that men need this type of structure, whereas women naturally have a body. I don't want to case not structure. I guess you can call it just an order of the day, if you will, which may come from physiology on the one hand, and on the other hand, another reason given for why men, it may sound sexist, if you will, but it's because women have other obligations which exempt them from having to perform these mitzvahs. There are other reasons as given. I don't want to get bogged down into it. There are other positive mitzvahs which are obligatory on men. Bris Milah, for obvious reasons, I hope. The rules of kahuna, as I mentioned before in reading the Rambam summary, the rules of Kohanim were only obligatory on men. Women can obviously be the bearers of Kohanim. And I have a cousin whose parents are, actually, it doesn't actually work that way, but my mother's father was a Kohen. So I guess my cousin's mother, who was my mother's sister, was also Kohen, but she's married to a Kohen. Oh, right, Ruth is Ruth's grandson. Okay, married to my cousin. He's a Kohen, and therefore my cousin, she doesn't have any sons yet, but when she will, please God, if she has any sons, she'll be giving birth to a Kohen because her husband is a Kohen. So any Kohen responsibilities are incumbent upon the men. But women who are part of a Kohen family, they get the benefits of it. So if a Kohen gets truma as a gift, if a Kohen has other types of food gifts which come to a Kohen, women derive benefit from them. But the mitzvos for Kohanim are specifically for men. The rules of witnesses and judges, not to be lost by the role that Devorah played. The Torah does tell us, not the Torah, the book of Shoftim tells us that Devorah was a shofetes. So there's a difference between a shofetes or a shofet, the type of judge that we look at in the realm of the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, and what we call nowadays a dayan. A dayan. So a dayan is a judge in a halachic sense, in a halachic realm, and according to halacha, a woman does not serve as a dayan, and according to halacha, a woman doesn't serve as a witness for religious testimony. There are circumstances where a woman's testimony is obviously accepted. It's not that a woman is not trustworthy. We're talking about a halachic category, but as a result of that halachic category, the rules associated with witnesses and dayanim are for men, and that is the category which are only for men. Next, negative mitzvahs. negative mitzvahs. So some of these are physical. Okay, for example, men are not allowed to shave the face with a razor. There are 5 specific points which the halacha delineates, which are not allowed to be shaved with a razor, and that law does not apply to women. So if a woman wants, for whatever reason, the bearded lady in the circus, if she's Jewish, okay, and she wants to shave with a razor, she is allowed to, because that mitzvah does not apply to her. Similarly, with respect to cutting the peyos, that the hair or on the face needs to go to a certain point, which we generally describe as the cheekbone, the bone on the below the temple. So that rule of cutting that hair is only applicable, of not cutting the hair rather, is only applicable to men and not applicable to women. If a woman wants to clear that area of her hair on the face, that is certainly permissible to her. The next negative mitzvah, which is only applicable to men, is that a man may not do aliyah l'regel. That means in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, going up to the Beis Hamikdash for the holidays, for Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, any man who did that had to be accompanied by a korban. He had to bring an animal which would serve as a korban, and if he did not do that, he was in violation. A woman did not have that responsibility. If a woman were to do aliyah l'regel, which is allowed, but she did not have to bring a korban, that rule would not apply. Similarly, Tumah for Kohanim mentioned, not similarly, but Tumah for Kohanim mentioned before how the rules of Kohanim apply to men, so that a Kohen is not allowed to become Tameh. That's applicable to, meaning to a dead body, is applicable to the male Kohanim, but if a woman is a Kohen, whether she is married to a Kohen or whether she is a daughter of a Kohen, these rules do not apply to her. She is allowed to become Tameh Lames. The rules of a king, since a king was only allowed to be Mikerev Achecha, he can only be of your brethren, of your brothers, in other words, a male. So any rules of a king, which I jokingly spoke about on Saturday night, that he can't have too many horses, he can't have too many wives, he can't have too much money, etc., those rules would only apply to a male, because only a king, because only a male can be a king. Similarly, the rules of, as I mentioned before, the rules of witnesses and judges on the positive side, on the negative side would apply as well. The rule against wearing women's clothing is only applicable to men. The Torah says that lo yilash gever simlas isha, that a man may not wear women's clothing. Obviously, a woman may wear women's clothing. I think that would be... All right, that's a joke, folks. Come on, give me a little bit of something here, okay? Obviously, a woman can wear women's clothing, but a man may not. And the other two are more of a sexual nature. One is being a kadesh. The word kadesh, surprisingly, has nothing to do with holiness. It's actually the opposite of holiness. But being a kadesh is essentially a male prostitute. That's the simplest way to define it. Although it does have specific definitions. But a woman has a similar obligation. She's not allowed to be a kadesha, as we'll see in a couple minutes. But the specific instruction is given to men that a man should not be a kadesh. And finally, while it's not a direct mitzvah in the Torah, it's certainly a halachic imperative that a man is not allowed to be motzi zera. Motzi zera means to have a seminal emission in a manner which is, we'll call it inappropriate. It's when it's in the act of marital intimacy, then it's appropriate. In any other, let's just say, forced or by design emission, it's considered to be a violation of halacha. And so, as a result of that, that is a negative mitzvah which only applies to men, simply because men are the only ones who can produce that. Along similar lines, and this is actually an important principle and an important thought to bear in mind to everybody. We have a halacha, and I don't know why I didn't put it in here, but we have a halacha of what we call kol isha. Right? Kol isha means to hear the sound of a woman singing. This is a halacha for men. Obviously, women can hear women singing. It's a halacha for men. But even though it's not a halacha for women, the responsibility upon women is to be careful to not put a man in a situation where he will violate. So, I remember once reading a story about a certain Rosh Yeshiva, I don't remember which one, that he was seen standing outside his house for an extended period of time, and somebody asked him, "Why don't you go home? Why don't you go inside?" And he said, "We have the cleaning woman is in the house, and as I stepped up to the door, I heard that she was singing, and I didn't want to take away from her joy that she's getting out of doing what she's doing. I'll wait outside. When she leaves, then I'll go back, and then I'll go into the house. Because if I go in, she'll be respectful enough to stop so that I'm not in violation of what I'm not supposed to be in violation of. So there you see he was aware, but out of respect, he said, no, this is her right as well. She's certainly entitled to have simcha. Okay, so that's in terms of the mitzvos and the halachos for men. And let's move on to the mitzvos, which are only for women. The Mishnah in Shabbos talks about the halachos, or the mitzvos of nida, challah, and Shabbos candles. So nida, of course, refers to a time period when a woman is menstruating, and especially if she's married, it's something that she needs to be aware of. Of course, the rules that are associated with the husband are applicable to the husband. But as far as her own calendar, clock, monitoring, etc., that is the woman's business and not the man's business. Man should really be letting the woman do it on her own. That's her department, and it needs to be left alone. I did hear an interesting story just about a woman who got married, a second marriage, in her 70s or 80s, certainly beyond the time when her biological clock in that way was functioning, and she insisted upon going to the mikveh before getting married, because that is what a woman does before she gets married. So it could be that I think she was a widow, that her first husband had passed away while before she hit menopause, and she hadn't gone to the mikveh since that point in time. So certainly in a halachic sense, she was correct to have gone to the mikveh in that particular time. I'm not going to ask about the marriage and what was going on, but certainly she went to the mikveh, and that was appropriate. The mitzvah challah is specifically assigned to women, but as we'll soon see, if a man is baking challah or bread, he should also do the mitzvah challah. And similarly with Shabbos candles, even though I think it's officially considered a rabbinic obligation, but Shabbos candles are given to women, so much so that there is one of the Nosei Kelim, one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch says that if a man comes along and says to his wife, I'm lighting the candles in this house, okay? Clearly he does not, I guess he thinks he wears the pants in the house, but if he does that, then he has to pay her a fine. He has to pay her because he's taking away her mitzvah. Okay, so let's bear that in mind. Of course, if a woman is not present, then Shabbos candles should be lit, but it is officially a woman's mitzvah, and it is not for a man to take. Which negative mitzvahs specifically in the Torah? So wearing a kli gever, the Torah distinguishes when it talks about a man, how a man is not supposed to wear simlas isha. It means the clothing of a woman, but when it gives a similar parallel mitzvah to women, it says kli gever. Kli gever doesn't mean clothing, it means vessels. Now, we all know that in our time, clothing styles evolve and clothing styles develop. So if anybody goes to a department store, I mean, even though there are clothes which are similar, for example, once upon a time, in this country, for example, and in most parts of the world, women only wore dresses, women only wore skirts, and etc. Nowadays, women wear everything, but there are clothes which are made for women, and there are specifically clothes which are made for men. So if you see a woman who's going into the men's section, the men's department, so we can say, maybe that's not the most, certainly if you see a man in the women's department, okay, that's another issue. Not to be disrespectful to a certain element of the community, not this community, but of the world community, which has been making rows and changing sensitivities and sensibilities around the world. So we'll just leave that as it is. But specifically to wear kli gever. So what's the definition of kli gever? Some say it's referring to military armor. That's one possibility. There are other definitions, but simply put, to say, nowadays, if there are women who wear pants, that's women's clothing. It's not considered to be men's clothing, and so that would not be considered inappropriate in a society in which it's not inappropriate, and the like. It's a longer discussion what it means, but the Torah prohibition is against kli gever. Interestingly enough, the next one is unique to women, because we know from the story of Rus. We learn that the halacha, or the mitzvah really, is that a Moabite man and an Ammonite man are not allowed to enter the kahal, the community of God, whereas a Moabite woman, Rus, was allowed to. Rus married Boaz, and that was considered acceptable. So that would mean that a woman a Jewish woman, is not allowed to marry a Moabite man or an Ammonite man. But a similar prohibition in terms of a man marrying a Moabite woman or an Ammonite woman would not be applicable. So that is specific to women. Being a Kadesha, as I mentioned before, that is the one of the Torah's words for a prostitute, and such that would be, of course, forbidden. There is a minhag, halacha, big discussion out there with reference to women and covering their hair. That is a much larger discussion, which I'm not going to go into tonight. But nonetheless, it's obviously a mitzvah which is only given to women. Men have a very strong minhag to also wear a head covering. And I actually once gave a class about the difference between a head covering and a hair covering. And the head covering issue, believe it or not, is really incumbent upon everybody. So much so that there are people who are very careful when they come to, and specifically during davening, that there are many people who, when they come to shul, even if they don't normally cover their hair, they'll put something on their head. It's one of the reasons why we have shuls put out doilies or scarves or head scarves, and why many women who don't normally cover their hair will wear a hat or something along those lines on Shabbos, which is a typical time when women come to shul, and that is clearly a nod to this to the minhag of covering the hair. Which mitzvos are only incumbent upon men but have been accepted by women? So the holiday mitzvos, which are largely the mitzvos which when we talk about mitzvos shehazman grama, are the ones which women have taken upon themselves. How many women eat in the sukkah? Virtually everyone, at least in some way, even if you don't necessarily eat a full meal in the sukkah. You want to hear Kiddush in the sukkah, you'll do something with the sukkah. How many women pick up the lulav and esrog? Most women do. How many women here are shofar blowing? I would say most, if not all, women do. Even if they don't make it to shul, women try very hard to have somebody come visit them if they were unable to come to shul, etc. Davening is considered to be a mitzvah, aseh she'azman grama. It's a time-bound mitzvah, and the truth is that there is a viewpoint that women are obligated to daven at least once a day. But most women do daven, and that is something which women have taken upon themselves. And of course, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah study, which, as the Rambam mentioned, is given specifically to men, but as has been mentioned several times over the weekend as well, that has expanded greatly, and many women, including everybody here, does study Torah. So that is something which has been accepted by women. Are there mitzvos which are only for men that women may not or cannot fulfill? So, according to most sources, although of course there is debate about this, and it is up for discussion, and you'll see in some even Orthodox synagogues, though it is not widespread, but it does exist in some Orthodox synagogues, but it's more often you'll see it in conservative or actually, I don't even know what they do in Reform synagogues, if anybody wears tefillin, but if some do, so tefillin and tzitzis have largely not been undertaken by women, and bris milah for obvious reasons, and the rules of shaving. If women want to go ahead and not remove any hair which may grow on the face, you're more than welcome to, but you're not fulfilling a mitzvah in doing so. Okay, woman has other encouragement in the rules of halacha, for example, that a woman should look desirable to her husband if a woman is married, and the like, and therefore the rules of shaving, as was outlined before, are not applicable to women. Are there mitzvahs which are only for women that men may or may not fulfill? As I mentioned both of these before. So the Shabbos candles and challah, if there is no woman around, then the Shabbos candles. There were several times when I was. The first time I actually saw this was when my mother was not home for Shabbos, and it was just my father and the boys. For whatever reason, maybe my mother went to a Shabbaton in her school, and she took my sisters along, and whatever. So my father would light Shabbos candles. So that was when we would do that, and I've done that as well at times when I was separate from my wife for Shabbos. And if I was not in a place where they were lighting, I'd been at my parents' home for whatever reason on a Shabbos. If I had a Shabbos bris in New York, and I left my wife in Florida, so my mother's lighting Shabbos candles, so I don't need to light Shabbos candles. But if I stay somewhere else and nobody's lighting Shabbos candles, then I would light the Shabbos candles myself. And with respect to challah, as I mentioned before, anybody who's baking bread with the right amount of flour needs to take challah. We'll get into what that means when we get into the demonstrations. Are there any mitzvahs which women are exempt from, but which they can still violate if they disregard them? This is a great trivia question. Okay, and the main one refers to the cutting of the hair, the cutting of the payas. So a woman for herself doesn't have the mitzvah of not cutting the payas or of not shaving with a razor. But if a woman cuts the payas off of a man or of a child who is of the age of chinuch, where, I mean, any child who's getting a haircut, any boy who's getting a haircut, whatever equals his payas should be left, really, because it's a nod to our knowledge of the law and the mitzvah thereof. But if a woman cuts those payas of the child or of the man, she is in violation of that mitzvah. She's ruining it for him, causing him to violate the mitzvah, and therefore she's in violation as well. However, the other mitzvah that I get, and I get this call a lot, especially if the husband is not Jewish, or if the husband just doesn't really care all that much, I'll get a Jewish woman who will call me and arrange for me to do the bris. It's not her responsibility. It's wonderful that she does it and takes care of it for her son, but it's not her obligation. The list of people who need to make sure that the bris takes place is firstly the father. If the father is around, and if he's Jewish, then he has the obligation. If the father, for whatever reason, is either not present or he shirks his responsibility, the obligation falls on Beis Din, the Jewish court, the rabbinical court. They are the ones who have to make sure that the bris takes place. And if the Beis Din doesn't take care of it, then the individual, when he gets to an age where he understands, has to take care of the bris for himself. If a woman takes care of it for him, that's very nice, but she's not fulfilling a mitzvah in her own right. She's helping her son fulfill his mitzvah. It's a fine line in halacha, just in terms of her fulfillment of the mitzvah, but the mitzvah is not hers. She doesn't have it at all. Next, which mitzvahs require both men and women to be fulfilled properly? So all marriage and divorce related mitzvahs, usually the mitzvah is upon the man, because the man is the one who does the act, the concept of the kinyan, or the concept of the marriage. In each case, it's the man's obligation. The man is the one who has the obligation to get married. Alkein yazov ish es aviv v'imo. A man has to leave his parents with the v'achmishto and cling to his wife. It's his obligation to get married because it's his obligation to have children. And this is very clear in the Gemara and in the Shulchan Aruch. They all say it's not a woman's obligation to have children. Good luck to any man fulfilling this mitzvah without a woman. Obviously, you need to have a woman in order to do so, but it's not her obligation. And as I once heard Rabbi Tendler say, there are only two mitzvahs in the Torah which are meant to cause some type of pain or suffering. One of them is bris milah, okay? But as Rabbi Tendler put it, that's the way Abraham did it. If you can do something to alleviate the pain of the baby, then God bless you, and you should. And the other one is what? No, that's the point. It's not a mitzvah for you. It's very easy for the man. Okay, the inui on Yom Kippur, suffering on Yom Kippur, is a mitzvah that includes a little bit of pain. The mitzvah is not on women to have children. If a woman lives her life and doesn't have a child, she has not been in violation of any mitzvah which was given to her. It wasn't given to her. Why? Why is it not a mitzvah for women? Because the Torah doesn't want to put a woman in a situation where she must do this. Now find me a mother who didn't want to have a child, or who doesn't want to have a child. Now there are women today who don't want to have a child, and sometimes they blog about it, and when you read what they write, you think that they're out of their mind, and you say, thank God you've removed your gene pool from society. But most women, I think, want to have children and are willing to do so without the mitzvah nonetheless. And we thank those of us who are men, thank those women very much for helping us fulfill our mitzvahs. But the Torah is not mandating you to go through that process and that difficult time in order to fulfill a Torah obligation. Okay? And again, thank you very much to all of them. So that's the mitzvah of puravu. When it comes to marriage, divorce, yibum, chalitza, yibum is the levirate marriage, and chalitza is the process which gets out of the levirate marriage, which we also learn about in the story of Rus. Not from Boaz does what we call yibum, right? Boaz takes the place of Rus's original husband, Machlon, but the relative, whose name was either Ploni Almoni, or he's given anonymity in the Megillah to protect it, he did what's called chalitza. He released himself from performing the levirate marriage with Rus, and that is a mitzvah which a man has to do. The chalitza, of course, a woman is involved in it. But anyway, but all of these things require both a man and a woman to be fulfilled properly. I just want to take a very parenthetical aside. When it comes to the mitzvah of divorce, so divorce is a mitzvah which is not obligatory upon everybody, but if people are going to get divorced, then we have a mitzvah for how to do it. And the only way to do it is to, as expeditiously as possible, for the man to give his wife a get. And if he does not do that, then he is in violation of the mitzvah, and society in general must do our part to force men and encourage men, force is not the right word, but certainly to encourage men to make sure that they're fulfilling their Torah obligation in terms of that, because it's a terrible stain on our way of life and our Jewish approach to marriage when there are people who take advantage of that and don't give the get when their marriage is over. And that's a very important thing to note. Okay, so there's the list, and I may have left some things out. If I did, I do apologize. I'm happy to take corrections and to acknowledge that I missed something. I mentioned that there were a couple that I missed. Kol Isha specifically as an obligation for men, and that just reminds me of one more thought that I want to share, and that is that the other responsibility, is aside for all of these, is that any way that a man can help and assist a woman in fulfilling her responsibilities, and any way a woman can assist a man in fulfilling his responsibilities, is always going to be encouraged. Gesundheit, okay, is always going to be encouraged. And on the negative side as well, it's like, for example, we have a concept of, this is a mitzvah for everybody, what we call hatznei aleches, right? Walking humbly with God. Okay? And the way in which society looks at these things, just to give an example, society often looks at the concept of modesty, and it defines it by dress. Now, modesty is not just defined by dress. Modesty is defined also by how people conduct themselves, how people behave, and it's a responsibility for everybody. But just on the dress side, generally speaking, if you were to just take a look at the Oscars as a great example, okay? It's not a great example, and don't look at the Oscars, but let's look at the Oscars, for example, and see the way people dress there. The men have every portion of their body covered except for their face and their hands, and the women have every portion of their body uncovered, of course, including their hands and their face. Okay, so what does that mean? It's a reflection on society. But if a man might end up being in violation of some of the rules which he has to be careful about, on account of that, it becomes the woman's responsibility to make sure that she is not being the cause of the man's sin. Oh, how sexist can you be? How misogynistic can you be? No, if hatznei aleches applies to everybody, then it really does apply to everybody. And it means don't draw attention to yourself. Don't make your life and your existence into being something much more than being a modest person. So, I think everybody understands what I'm saying. I know that I'm not speaking to a crowd that has a major problem with this, so I'm in a very safe place here. But nonetheless, that needs to be said, and so I said it. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn off the microphone because I can't do the demonstrations that I'm going to be doing with the microphone in my hand. And in line with what I just said, to the women in this room, even though you do not put on tefillin, you must remind your husband that he's probably doing it wrong, and make sure. And I, by the way, I don't say this in a facetious way. I really mean this. In just about every shul that I've ever davened in, I look around the room and I find 85% of the men are not wearing their tefillin correctly. Okay, so please make sure that if there's a man in your life who is in this room, that you pay attention and you remind him that he has to, because the halach, when it describes those who wear tefillin incorrectly, they not only say that you're not fulfilling your mitzvah, but it even says you need to do tshuva. You need to repent from the way in which you're denigrating the mitzvah of tefillin. Having said that, let's take a look. Okay, so there are two portions of tefillin. We have, as the Rambam says, it's either two mitzvahs. According to the Rambam, according to others, it's one mitzvah. And this is the way tefillin are supposed to be worn. I'm not a huge muscle man, but my muscle can be distinguished here. And at the point where
Thank you, everybody. Thank God I wasn't hired for my muscles. Okay. At the point where it can be delineated, which is in my case right over here, that's where the bottom of the tefillin has to go. It also needs to be aimed towards the body, towards the heart. There are different customs as to whether one's wrapping in one direction, the other direction, how it's wrapped around the hand. I'm not getting into that. I'm just getting into the placement. So essentially, it's like this. It's on the lower half of the muscle going up and towards the body. So much so that when the arm is resting, the tefillin have to be pointed towards the body. If, when the arm is resting, like this, the tefillin are away from the body, wrong. And a person needs to be very careful to make sure that that is done correctly. That's as far as the hand goes. As far as the head goes, it's very simple. And I put on here, completely above the existent or former hairline. It's not meant to be a joke. That's the way it's described in halacha. Obviously, some men are bald, and therefore they don't have a hairline anymore. But this is the way it goes. So in my case, thank God, it's still there. Okay? And so the tefillin have to be completely above the hairline. Completely above. I see in many places, men are wearing their tefillin here, they're wearing their tefillin here, they're wearing their tefillin here. If it hangs, obviously people have different shaped heads. But a good litmus test is the tefillin on the head? If it's hanging off the head like this, it's off. It's not resting on the head. It's in the wrong place. And the way in which we learn this is because, and we all know this from the Shema, where is the tefillin? V'hagilu totafos, finish it. Beinenecha. Beinenecha means between your eyes. There's another place in the Torah that describes something which is between your eyes, and that is that you're not allowed to make a bald spot between your eyes if somebody dies. How can you make a bald spot between your eyes? And don't tell me about the unibrow. Okay, I'm not talking about that. The way you make a bald spot between your eyes is in a place where you have hair. So the hair, we learned from there that the only place where beinenecha means is where your hair is, or was, in a spot where you could theoretically make a bald spot. So the tefillin has to go above the hairline, not a place where you couldn't make a bald spot because there's no hair there. And it's important to do that. I'm telling you in most, anybody who needs help with it, we'll just leave it at that. Anybody who needs help with adjusting your tefillin, I'm happy to help you do that in order to fulfill this mitzvah properly. And that's with reference to tefillin. When it comes to talis, when it comes to just about every mitzvah. So the way in which we perform the mitzvah is we say the bracha before we do it. The bracha on putting on a talis is the bracha al atifas tzitzis, right? On the for wrapping the tzitzis. So how do we do that? Well, you have to put the talis over you in some way before you actually wrap it. There are different opinions. Some say you wrap the talis over yourself like this, okay, so that it's wrapped, and then as you say the bracha, you put the tzitzis, you throw the tzitzis over your shoulder. Some do it a little more of a wrapping. Instead of wrapping it around their body, they wrap it over their head. They'll do it one like this, and one like this. Which kind of gets in the way of saying the bracha, but nonetheless. Okay, fine. That's how you say the bracha, and then you wrap it by throwing it over your shoulder. When you wear the talis, and this is most important, this is why a prayer shawl that you see in a non-Orthodox synagogue is wrong. You can't fulfill your mitzvah with it. Because when you wear tzitzis, whether it's a talis katan, where it's a lot easier, when you wear tzitzis underneath your clothing, so whether you wear those or whether you wear a talis, you have four corners. Two corners need to be in front of your body. Two corners need to be behind your body. So if you're wearing a prayer shawl, which goes over your neck, and the whole thing is like this, where are all the corners? In front. And that's not an appropriate way to do the mitzvah of tzitzis. Yes?
Did the scarf follow the same in body? In terms of, body?
The ones who are aware of halacha. Yes. Okay? Certainly, there are Sephardic synagogues where you have people who are what we'll call traditional. Like they honor, certain aspects of Judaism in the most profound way. But that doesn't mean that they know halacha. Even though, many people say, I knew that, no, you don't. So anyway, I will follow all that stuff afterwards. And that's how a talis is supposed to be worn. 2 strings in the front, 2 strings in the back. When it comes to the candles, so I talked about this in the first Hilchos class, but I imagine some people weren't here. When it comes to the Shabbos candles, so we have to be in a catch-22 situation where you can't, if once you light the candles, it's officially Shabbos. And some say once you say the bracha, it's officially Shabbos. And then you can't light the candles. So the way in which we do it is we light the candles, and then we pretend as if we haven't lit them yet by covering our eyes. There are no candles lit, no candles. I say the bracha with my eyes covered, not me, I have to pay my wife. But the woman says it with her eyes covered, and then she removes her hands, then the candles are lit. That's how we do it on Shabbos. When it comes to Yom Tov, there's actually a debate. And I gave you two of the sources, actually I didn't give you one of the sources, but the source which is quoted by the Magen Avraham, although I couldn't find it in the Drisha, he says that the Drisha's mother, and some say it may have been his grandmother, she would light Yom Tov candles, not Shabbos, Yom Tov candles, the way we light Hanukkah candles. You make the bracha and then you light it. Why? Because on Yom Tov you're allowed to transfer fire, as we know from the rules of cooking, whereas on Shabbos you can't do that. So that's why on Shabbos we light the candles first. Say the bracha with the eyes covered. You can do that for Yom Tov too, or according to the mother or grandmother of the Drisha, who is quoted in halakhic sources, it could be done the same way we light Hanukkah candles. And obviously Hanukkah candles, we all know, as we just did, we're holding the candle right there, we say the bracha, and then we light the candles. I think the rest of these I could do, so I'll put the microphone back on.
The only thing about Hanukkah candles, although we just finished Hanukkah, so obviously it doesn't really matter now. But when we light the candles, we always light the new one first. It's because the bracha is done for the fulfillment of the new mitzvah. Last night's candle was last night's mitzvah. The new candle is the new mitzvah, unless for whatever reason a family is only lighting one candle per individual, which is another way of fulfilling the mitzvah. But anyway, so we light the new candle first. When it comes to taking challah, so I gave you a link to an article in the Star K, which is a good article summarizing the rules of the mitzvah of taking challah, and it also gives you there the amounts of flour which would obligate a person to take challah. What is taking challah? So the method I took straight from the article. It says right here that after kneading while standing, it's giving you all the details of the halacha. A person should hold with the right hand a kazayas of the dough. Kazayas basically means probably like a fistful. Okay, a fistful of the dough, and whether you say full bracha or don't say a bracha depends on how much flour.
Okay. Whether you say the bracha or don't say bracha depends on how much flour is in the mixture of the dough. And the article that on the Star K website, which is worth reading, goes into details about what if you have different batches of dough and altogether it equals that amount of dough, that amount of flour. Typically, for example, I know in our house we make pizza in our house, and the amount of flour that we put in the pizza is usually no more than 3 cups. So we're not taking challah from it because it's not a whole lot of flour. If you're using a lot more dough, if you're making a huge batch, if you use it, for sure, if you use a 5-pound bag of flour to make a huge batch of dough for challah, then you have to take the mitzvah of challah and say with the bracha. But I encourage you to look that up in that article and learn about the mitzvah of challah. When it comes to the next mitzvahs, sukkah, lulav, matzah. So I gave a very brief summary on the sheet here, which I'm just going to elaborate upon a little bit. As I mentioned before, whenever we fulfill a mitzvah, we say the bracha before we actually fulfill it. So when it comes to sitting in the sukkah, we only make the bracha when we're eating, although people on sukkahs are encouraged to use the sukkah for as many activities as possible, even sleeping if possible. Even though certainly in Florida with the rain all the time, it's probably harder to do that. But in Israel, many people do. I know families that actually have a one sukkah for eating, and another sukkah for everybody to sleep in, and another sukkah for the mother and father of the family to sleep in as well. And they do that. But when it comes to making the bracha, we do it immediately before eating, as we generally know, as at the end of Kiddush usually. Or if you're not making Kiddush, so you make the bracha on your food and you make a bracha l'shem b'sukkah, that's how that is done. When it comes to the taking of the lulav, so we make the bracha again, before turning over the esrog. The way in which we're supposed to hold the esrog is the way in which it grows on the tree. The way it grows is stem to branch, okay, and stem to branch, so it's just this grows out, so we're doing it in the direction in which it grows. So we hold the esrog upside down as we're making the bracha, and then we turn it over, because some say, well, if you're holding the esrog in the proper way, you've already fulfilled your mitzvah. You can't fulfill your mitzvah before you said your bracha. So that's why we do it that way. And then the way in which we wave it is in a circular motion. There are different viewpoints, but probably the easiest and probably the most correct way to do it is to do straight in front of you, in other words, to east, and then just do a full circle turning to your right, followed by up and down. That's how we do lulav. When it comes to matzah, there are different opinions about how much matzah is considered to be a kazayis. But again, you make the bracha on al achilas matzah, and then you eat. You have to eat in a requisite amount of time, 2 to 4 minutes, whatever the amount of matzah is, without a hefsek, without a break. Because until you've eaten that amount, remember, this is a mitzvah. It's not like when you have your 2 loaves of bread, you have a tiny piece of challah, then fine, you're done. You don't have a mitzvah to eat challah on Shabbos. You have a mitzvah to eat an amount of matzah. And that amount of matzah is kazayas. However, kazayas is defined, whether you say it's 2 whole matzahs, which is probably some Chazon Ish amount, or whether it's something which is similar to like the size of a ham, which is probably the smallest amount. So that needs to be eaten straight without interruption. That's the way we perform it. A lot of people that take one bite, they think it's like challah. They start talking right away. Inappropriate, incorrect. Eat the matzah and eat the correct amount of matzah to fulfill the obligation. For mitzvahs that involve hearing, very simple. Just listen carefully. Okay, but have in mind to be yotzei with the bracha being recited by the person who is performing the mitzvah, whether it's shofar blowing or a Megillah reading. Those are the main mitzvahs that involve hearing. And then make sure to hear the whole thing. That's why when it comes to shofar blowing, we do the first 30 sounds, again, without interruption. And we want everybody to hear the minimum, which is 30 sounds without interruption. And when it comes to Megillah Esther, it's a rabbinic obligation, but want to hear every word, which is why people are really encouraged not to make too much noise during the Megillah reading, and if they miss a word, to try to catch up to the person who's reading. Hopefully, if that happens, the person who's reading is at a pace where you can do that. When it comes to Kiddush Levana, so Kiddush Levana. Actually, there is a debate amongst the authorities with reference to halacha, whether women should be saying Kiddush Levana or not. There is a notion, which I don't completely understand, that the women caused the pagam in the Levana. The sun and the moon were originally the same size. By the way, there's a lot of like chava problems, by the way. The Mishnah that in Bam Madlikin, which talks about the challah, the mida challah, and hadlaka saner, it's all a response to chava. It has to do with what chava did, and for that I apologize, because you didn't do it, but it comes from there as well. The Shla says that women shouldn't say Kiddush Levana because chava caused the pagam in the moon and the sun were originally the same size, and it became smaller on account of chava. So that's the reason why he says that women should not say Kiddush Levana. There are women who say Kiddush Levana. I promise you, you'll not be struck down by lightning if you do so. Okay, how does one say Kiddush Levana? So the main thing to remember is that we are saying a bracha over the presence of the moon, but we are not howling at the moon. We're not praying to the moon. We're praying to God. So we have to look at the moon to say, oh, there's the moon, and then we say the bracha. I recommend to face Mizrach, because that's the way we normally daven, facing east. In this way, one is indicating, I'm not praying to the moon, I'm praying to God. And hopefully, for those who say Kiddush Levana, they do that correctly. There is one challenge that many people who say Kiddush Levana are faced with, and that is when the people who are saying the whole section of it get to the part of Shalom Aleichem, when they walk around to all their buddies and say Shalom Aleichem. Whoever is doing that, they have to be sure that the person who you're saying Shalom Aleichem to is not in the middle of the bracha. Because if the person is in the middle of a bracha, then you're causing that person to make a hefsek, a pause and a break. So that's why whenever I do it, I always look at what the person's pointing out with their finger. If they're past the bracha, okay, safe zone, Shalom Aleichem. If they're in the middle of the bracha, then don't do that. Because they're in the middle of the bracha, you don't want to, maybe they're not aware that they can't make that break, or maybe they just want to be polite and say they respond in kind. So that is the case. The last thought here, there is a debate as to whether women should say brachos for mitzvos, for which they are not commanded. So I'm not going to get into that debate now. Obviously, some of the mitzvahs which we're talking about are things which people say on your behalf. Shofar, Megillah, for example. Sitting in the sukkah often is said by whoever is going to be saying the Kiddush. So it's always appropriate to answer Amen. Whether a woman needs to say that the brachos for other mitzvahs which a woman fulfills is, as I mentioned here, a debate. There are those who say yes, there are those who say no. I'm not going to render a decision now because it's not relevant for the here and now. Is it a terrible thing to say a bracha? We generally say Safek brachos lahakel, that if you're in doubt as to whether you should be saying a bracha or not, that one should be lenient and not say the bracha. But if a person says, look, I'm fulfilling this mitzvah, I'm allowed to fulfill this mitzvah, there's nothing wrong with me fulfilling this mitzvah, and I want to do it in the fullest way through also saying the bracha, then okay, so say the bracha. And I don't think it's worth going crazy about, but it is worth knowing that there are both opinions out there. Okay, I hope that tonight, through understanding the mitzvahs that men have, and through understanding the mitzvahs that women have, we understand that each of us has a place in this thing which we call Judaism. Each of us has our own responsibilities. Of course, you'll notice that there are many mitzvahs which are not on this list, and that's because they're incumbent upon everybody. And many of the things here are either time-bound or they're related to anatomy, and because of that, there are distinctions between men and women. But otherwise, we all share very much in this in the practice of Judaism, which we call orthodoxy, which we call adherent to the Torah, which we call adherent to the codes of law, the Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam, etc. And we should all be blessed to be able to find the most fulfillment through the mitzvos which we share, and also the mitzvos which we don't share, which are exclusively our own. Thank you very much, everybody.